Thank you very much, and I deeply appreciate the invitation from the Fayette County Tea Party to come and speak to you, and I appreciate your attention. I'm just a little nervous here because for a long period in my life, about 15 years, whenever I had on a tie and was in a courtroom, the first 5 words I was most likely to hear were, "Will the defendant please rise?" Now, that's been a long time ago now. That all ended about 2000, but you don't forget that stuff easily, I'll tell you. I have to do a little advertisement first. I publish a newsletter every month. It's a paid subscription, and I've got copies of 2 of the last issues up here, so I recommend that you grab one of those before you go. They're free to you tonight. I'm actually in the gold and silver business. My family has a farm in Middle Tennessee where we raise grass-fed animals, but I've been in the gold and silver business since 1980. And I publish a daily commentary on the internet. You can sign up for that. That's free. And the address of my website is the-moneychanger.com. That's the-moneychanger.com. If you leave out the dash, it will take you to a porno site. I have nothing to do with the porno site. the-moneychanger.com, and if you look there, it's very easy to sign up, and it costs you nothing. Then I have one more advertisement. There are 2 bills in the legislature to remove the sales tax on silver and gold. In the House, there's one bill, 3202, and if you just kind of jot this down, because I'm going to ask you to do something with them. Right now, the circulation of gold and silver money is hindered because the state claims that there's a sales tax, that it's liable to a sales tax, which is ridiculous. It's like them saying that when you go to the bank and give them a 20, they give you 2 10s, you're supposed to pay sales tax on that. And that's what I got in the fight with the Tennessee government about, thanks to the IRS. Anyway, there are 2 bills, House Bill 3202, and the companion bill in the Senate is 3361. And then there's another one that's very close to it, 2677 in the House and 2574 in the Senate. And both of these would remove the sales tax on gold and silver coin. And the reason let me give you the numbers again. House Bill 2677, and in the Senate 2574. And then the other one is 3202. And this companion bill in the Senate is 3361. And is that for me? Oh, the reason that I'm telling you about this is I want you to contact your senators and representatives in the House, in the House and Senate, and ask them to vote for these bills, because the state has put an artificial barrier to the circulation of gold and silver coin. And until they remove that sales tax, then there we are.
This is a Tennessee bill.
These are Tennessee bills, right. You won't hear me say much about federal government things, and I'll explain to you in a minute why. Back in just a few years ago in Fayette County, there was a man driving on the back roads, and he got lost. And he came up to this crossroads, and there was a wooden fence on one corner, and there was a little boy sitting up on that fence about 10 or 12 years old, and the man thought, well, I'll ask him and maybe he can tell me how I can get out of here. And so he looked up at the little boy and he said, "Son, if I go straight ahead, where will that road take me?" The little boy looked at him and said, "I'm really sorry to tell you this, but I don't know where that will take you." And then he said, "Well, son, let me ask you this. If I take a right here and take this road, where will that take me?" He said, "Sir, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but I just don't know." He said, "Well, look, what if I turned left and went that way? Where would I end up?" He said, "Sir, it breaks my heart to tell you this, but I just don't have any idea." He said, "Now, son, I'm not about to do this, but suppose I turned my car around and went right back the way I came, where would I end up?" "Sir, I have no idea." He looked at the boy and he said, "Son, you just don't know anything, do you?" He said, "That's right, but I ain't lost." Now, I don't claim to be anything more than a natural-born fool from Tennessee, but I ain't lost. And a lot of people in this country are. And I'll tell you something else. I've learned the hard way to tell the truth. When I was a little boy, I was one of those kids that if there was anything in the room breakable, I would break it, especially if I was alone in the room. And of course, that leads to a great temptation to embellish when you're asked who did it. And so invariably, I would not tell the truth. And so I'd end up getting two whippings, one for breaking it, one for not telling the truth. And I finally caught on. I was better off just to go in and take the whipping in the first place and tell the truth than I was to lie and get two whippings. And then after I grew up and got into business of my own, I found out that the people who want to hear the truth are a lot better to work with than the people who want to hear a lie. And you're going to do a lot better business with them by just sticking with the ones who want to hear the truth and telling them the truth. Because in the long run, that's the best way to do it. Now, I often say in my daily commentaries that I'm no more than a natural-born fool. But the fact is, in an age of folly, then the wise are considered to be fools. So I come here tonight to tell you I've settled out I've resigned myself to the fact in my life. The only gift I have is the gift of stating the obvious. Because apparently nobody else will say it. It's like living in a room with an open garbage can. I mean, the world that we live in today, nobody wants to say anything about that garbage can. So I'm here tonight to tell you, to state the obvious and to tell you the truth. I want to tell you, there's another website, and you might want to write this down. It's called Tennessee Farmers and Freeholders. And if you'll go to that Tennessee Farmers and Freeholders website, on the front page, there is a speech that I gave to the Tea Party Leadership Summit in Jackson about a year ago, in June last year, called Restoring Freedom in Tennessee. And that is a longer and more complicated version of what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. But I encourage you to go and read that. I realized after I'd given that speech, I've been thinking about these things for 40 years, 45 years. And so when I try to blast everything out at you at once, it's like making you drink out of a fire hose. It's just too much. I try to go too many places. So tonight I'm going to try to keep that down. But you can look for that speech called Restoring Freedom in Tennessee. And you'll see that I lay out a threefold plan. We have to restore monetary freedom, we have to restore economic freedom, and we have to restore food freedom. Economic, monetary, and food freedom. And I encourage you to go read that. And again, I tell you, I'm here to tell you the truth tonight. I'm not here to flatter you or to feed your enthusiasms. So you may hear some things from me that you don't particularly want to hear. But I'm going to tell you a series of truths. Truth number one, presidential politics is a waste of time. So is national politics. But the problem is that just like a big old bass, when that bait goes in front of us, we jump for it. We take that bait. No matter who is elected, that person is going to do the establishment's work. It doesn't matter if it's George Bush or Bill Clinton or Barack Obama. They're going to do whatever the establishment tells them to do. And they make no more difference to the running of this country than the election of a high school student body president makes to the superintendent who runs the schools. It's just that simple. Now, it might be worth supporting Ron Paul just to get to know his supporters. But I have to tell you, he doesn't stand a chance to win. And if he did win, they would do everything they could to stymie any of the reforms that he tried to put in place. So if we don't have power in presidential elections, if we don't have power in national politics, where do we have power? Where do you have power and influence? In your family. You have power and influence in your family. The people in your family will listen to you. In your community, your neighbors who live right around you will listen to what you have to say because they know you and they trust you. In your town, in your state. And let me tell you something, do not sell the state of Tennessee legislature short. There's some fine people up there, some people with deep understanding and a great love for constitutional liberty, so don't sell them short. You can actually have some effect in those places, so you have to focus there and not be distracted by the red herring of presidential politics, because the whole purpose of it is to distract you, to keep you from demanding any changes that will actually restore freedom in this country. Truth number 2. The majority of people in the United States are government dependents. The majority of people in the United States are government dependents. They depend on government for their income. Now, I know about Tennessee, I know about all the southern states because about a year and a half ago I did a study on those. In Tennessee, 52% of the income of the state of Tennessee comes from government spending. About 19% comes from state and local government spending, and then 32% or so comes from direct federal spending and federal loans. So we don't have an economy. What we've got is half of the people producing something and a little more than half who don't produce anything, or they watch, they control, they regulate, and they write tickets to the other half and keep them from doing what they want to do. In most southern states, 1 out of 5 people, 20%, receive Social Security payments. In some states, 2 out of 3 people over 65 have no other source of income. And in most states, at least 1 out of 3. Nearly 1 in 5 people in Tennessee, that is 20%, receive food stamps. And many Tennesseans who don't just receive transfer payments, and all these things I talked about are called transfer payments, they make their living working for operations that are paid for by the Defense Department or by the federal government one way or the other. And then there's the whole medical care debacle, and that threatens to engulf all government spending altogether. Now, everybody wants government money. There's just one problem. All government money comes with a sock in the jaw. Let me repeat that for you, because that's an axiom. You can write that down. You can carve it in stone, because it's always true. All government money comes with a sock in the jaw. It doesn't matter whether it's agricultural subsidies, or Social Security, or Medicare, or Medicaid, or subsidies for the Asian Elephant Conservation Program, for which Tennessee in 2009 received over $40,000. Or the Executive Office for Weed and Seed, for which the feds paid Tennessee government $535,000 in 2009. I don't even want to guess. I don't want to think what kind of weed and what kind of seed they were talking about and paying for. Yet everyone eagerly lines up for his place at the government trough. Everybody thinks that it's those other people, those other folks who are the real freeloaders and the deadbeats. Clearly, you can't just cut everyone off overnight. You can't just say, okay, we're going to stop all that government spending, and you half and more than half of the people who make your income from government, you're just going to have to do whatever you can do. You're just going to have to grab a root and growl. That won't work. That won't work. That will create a revolution that would be the end of freedom in this country. We have to have some plan to replace government spending with production and prosperity or with Christian charity. After all, ask yourself this question: why did the government step in to take care of the old, the sick, the infirm, widows and orphans? They did it because the church wouldn't do it. And the church still doesn't do it. So it's not really right to complain, for us to complain about this little group of people who receive Social Security, or this little group of people who receive food stamps, when we're not willing to take care of those people voluntarily ourselves. And an old person who's retired and draws his whole living from Social Security is not exactly what you call living in the lap of luxury. At least nobody I know that draws Social Security is living in the lap of luxury. And besides, they had that money taken out of their check the whole time that they worked. And if they had been able to invest it themselves, they would have had 5, 10, 15 times as much money if the government hadn't taken it out of their pockets. So you have to be careful when you talk about these people who are freeloading on the government. A lot of these are people who really have a claim on our charity. And if you don't want the government to take care of them, then you're going to have to take care of them. All of us are going to have to take care of them. And most of all, the church is going to have to take care of them. But we can only replace government spending with prosperity that comes from stable local economies. And that begins with local agriculture. Truth number 3, local economies must be rebuilt on local agriculture. Now, let me explain to you what the whole idea that I'm presenting to you here is: we can't fix everything. We can't fix an economy that is rotten. We can't fix an economy where money has been misdirected into thousands and thousands of investments, millions of investments that will never pay off. That's what you're seeing right now. You're seeing all that bad debt being liquidated. We can't fix that all at once. What we can do is we can build an economy in parallel to that is stable and that will be prosperous over the long term. And it's not a fast proposition. It's a one day at a time proposition. But that's the only way that we're going to rebuild it, because the very worst thing that could happen is for the government to come in and say, okay, we got a plan for redoing everything. You see? Because when that happens, all of the inventiveness, all of the cleverness, all of the energy that all of you bring to the economy is suppressed and lost. I understand that all the government economic development programs and Chamber of Commerce plans focus on drawing in outside industry. But that cannot build a sustainable economy. It cannot build stable prosperity. Why is that? Because just as soon as that corporation figures out that they can get it done cheaper in Mexico or China, it's gone. And I come from a county, Lawrence County, where that's happened in the last 4 years. And it is devastating when those jobs that everybody depended on suddenly disappear overnight. Prosperity cannot be built on borrowing and speculating, on debt and gambling, in other words, but only on production. And production can serve two kinds of markets. It can serve a market that can be saturated, like the market for automobiles or the market for large screen TVs, or it can serve a market that is never saturated, and that is the market for food. I want you to understand something that a lot of people who are economists, in fact, very few economists understand anymore. Where does the wealth of the world come from? It comes from the things men take out of the ground. The wealth of the world comes from the things men take out of the ground. That's where it comes from. 20% from mining, 80% from agriculture. I'm not saying all the wealth comes from there directly. I'm saying it's derived from there. That's where all the action begins. And everything else is just processing. That's all. Since World War II, debt has been substituted for production in this country. And the government encouraged that, because agriculture's share of national income was steadily declining. Why does that make a difference to you? Let me explain. Every dollar of agricultural income processed through the economy becomes $7 of national income. Every dollar of agricultural income as it goes through the economy becomes $7 of national income. And if you run the farmers off the land, if they leave because they're getting a smaller and smaller share of the national income, how are you going to make it up? What are you going to do about that lost production and lost income? The way it's been made up is that we have substituted debt for production. But of course, as you all know, borrowing has a limit. And as the events of the last 20 years have shown, and eventually an economy reaches the point where it can no longer produce enough surplus to pay the interest burden. And when that happens, you're bankrupt. Now, here's how agriculture fits in. Let me kind of go back and explain to you how agriculture got into this mess. I want you to think about the year 1917, most important economic year in the whole 20th century. And probably none of you know what happened in 1917. Doesn't have anything to do with the war. 1917 is the year they introduced the Fordson tractor. That's the year. Until that time, there was not really a national economy in the United States in the sense that we have a centralized national economy today. The whole country was a collection of small local economies. And farmers raised their own motive power, horses and mules. They devoted about a third of their acreage to feeding those animals, raising hay and grain to feed them. And most communities had a local cash circulation. That is, the farmer got money, and then he spent his money in town with the tailor and the baker and the hardware store and the dry goods store, and then all that money came back around when those people bought food from the farmers. So there was a local circulation. There was very little drainage out of that circulation, very little loss. And then they started buying tractors. Now, somebody got to send money to Detroit for a tractor. And then somebody's got to send money to New York to Standard Oil to buy gasoline for that tractor. And I'm not saying tractors are necessarily a bad thing, but you have to understand that this upset the whole balance that agriculture and economy had in the United States after that time. Now, the farmer before this didn't need much cash money. And usually they got their cash at the end of the year when they sold their cash crop, which around here would be cotton, Middle Tennessee be tobacco, and that sort of thing. But mostly they raised most of the stuff they needed themselves, and they had very little need for cash. Now all of a sudden they needed cash because they had to send that money to Detroit. They had to send that money to New York, and it didn't come back, okay? It didn't stay in the local economy. It was drained out of the local economy. So they needed that cash. So what did they do? Well, a third of their acreage, they had been planting for grain. They didn't need that for the animals anymore. So they planted all that. And it was 1917, 1918. Price of cotton, price of wheat, price of anything you could grow was sky high because there was a war on in Europe. And they would buy anything America could produce. And so they planted fence row to fence row. And guess what happened? 1920 came, and it was the end of it. And an agricultural depression ensued in this country 10 years before the depression, 12 years before the depression that hit Wall Street. Now they were in a pickle sure enough, so what did they do? Well, they had planted fence row to fence row before, so now they pulled out the fences and they planted those too. And so they had a depression that put hundreds of farmers out of business. Now, little by little, over the ensuing years, local economies have been cannibalized and centralized into one national economy. What that means is that the cash flow has been sucked away out of local economies, and those economies have withered. Do you have a cleaner here in Somerville? Do you have a cleaner? You have one? Do you have anybody that fixes shoes? Shoe repair shop? Do you have a bakery? You see what I'm saying? Those were all businesses that all flourished until about the last 30 years or so. And as the economy, as the local economy has been drained dry by this cash flowing away to New York and Chicago and Bentonville, then your local merchants have gone out of business. They can't compete because you didn't have any money to spend with them. The local community had no money to spend with them, or else the money was sucked away. So you can imagine how much cash flow your local economy is losing every year, and that if you could recapture that, you could use it to rebuild your local economy and rebuild local prosperity, but you have to begin by rebuilding local agriculture. Now, the USDA, and that's a government agency, so you know they got it right. The USDA estimates that every man, woman, and child in the United States spends $1,800 a year on food and beverages. I want you to think about that just a minute. In Fayette County, where you have a few over 48,000 people, that's a cash flow of $87 million a year. $87 million a year. And in your Memphis market next door, there's 662, nearly 663,000 people, and they spend $1,193,000,000 on food every year. And in the metro Memphis market that has 1.3 million people, that's $2,369,000,000 a year spent on food. Now ask yourself, could you build a local economy on a cash flow of $87 million? Could you build a local economy on a cash flow of $2.4 billion a year? And the answer is, of course you could. And it's renewable because remember, every year those same people that spent $1,800 last year are going to spend it again this year on food. And right now, here's what's happening. All of you people in Fayette County, I assume most of you anyway, have to go outside of Fayette County, find that $1,800 a year for everybody in your family and all the rest of the money you make, bring it back in here to this county so you can send it off to Bentonville again this year, or to New York, or wherever it's going. You see? You've got to do that every year because that money doesn't stay here. That money that you spend does not stay here in Fayette County. I want to ask y'all a question. Are there any dairies here in Fayette County? Any left?
It's closed last year. Last one closed last year.
Last one closed last year. 20 years ago in Tennessee, and if you drive around the countryside, you'll see, I call them the tombstones of dead dairies, because you'll see, everywhere you go, you'll see silos. You know why? Because farmers can make money selling raw milk. That's why. And they used to make a lot of money. 20 years ago in Tennessee, there were 10,000 dairies. Today, less than 500. So what that means is that you drink milk shipped 1,700 miles away from California, or you drink milk shipped from 1,200 miles away in Florida, because we're too dumb to raise it here in Tennessee. Do you believe that? Because I don't. Because I know the conditions they raise that milk, produce that milk under. They raise it in conditions where the animals are either on concrete all their lives or hock deep in manure. And if you don't think we can't raise better milk than that here in Tennessee and ship it to you at the same price and deliver it to you at the same price that they raise it and produce it, you're just wrong. That's all I can say. But a local economy only starts with agricultural production. It only starts with that. Farmers will spend their income in local businesses, and local businesses will spring up to serve them. And the cash flow that used to go away to New York and Bentonville and Chicago will stay and circulate in that local economy. And not only farmers, but everybody will prosper by it. So renewing local agriculture is the beginning, but only the beginning, of rebuilding your local economy. Truth number 4. Industrial agriculture is becoming extinct. Industrial agriculture is becoming extinct. The government promoted idea of factories in the field, which they began promoting in the 1930s, has failed. And 20 or 25 years from now, nobody will ever believe that farming was done that way, for two reasons. It's expensive. It's terribly expensive. It is unsustainable, and it's environmentally damaging. And a revolution against it is quietly growing. I call this revolution the food freedom movement. And you have to understand that a large part of what this food freedom movement is fighting against is corporate control of the United States government. Corporate control that allows them to introduce things like GMOs without sufficient testing for their safety, and which allows them to use gigantic dosages of chemicals. The food freedom movement today, in my considered opinion, is the strongest movement for freedom in the United States, probably the strongest in the last 150 years. And let me tell you why it's strong. Mama has a baby, 2 months old, that has asthma. And she's been up night after night with that child wondering if he was going to live to see the sun come up. And somebody whispers to her, now I'm not saying this will work, but I'm just telling you I've heard of this. Somebody whispers to her, you know, if you give that baby raw milk, he'll get over that asthma. And so she tries it and she gives it to him for a month. And she doesn't stay up all night with him anymore. Now what's going to happen? If Mama has to shoot a cop, she's going to get that raw milk. Okay? She's going to get that raw milk. She'll find a place to get it. And we've been fighting for nearly 10 years in Tennessee to get raw milk, quote, legalized. To get legalized, something that people have been doing not just since memory runneth not to the contrary, thousands of years. And I drink raw milk every day that dawns, and I'm glad to get it. And all of my children and all my 13 grandchildren drink it as well. And you look at them and you won't find an unhealthy one amongst them. But the U.S. government will tell you it'll kill you if you drink raw milk. It'll kill you. And I bet you there are a lot of y'all that grew up in here drinking raw milk, and you know better than that. But the food freedom movement is the strongest movement for human liberty in the United States today. If you don't know about it, go to the Weston A. Price Foundation website. That's westonaprice.org. It's huge. It has an enormous amount of scientifically reliable information. People are learning about the bad health effects of herbicides and pesticides and genetically modified foods. And they won't eat them. And they will pay local farmers who they can look at eye to eye and know they will pay those people good prices for clean, fresh food. That's the difference that will make local agriculture work today and will make local agriculture profitable. Now, I know that the government says it's okay to eat genetically modified food. In Europe, of course, they have to label it genetically modified so that consumers know what they're getting. And I just want to tell you a little anecdote, and it's just an anecdote, it's not scientific proof. But until recently, we were buying corn from a fella who assured us that it was non-GMO corn. And we kept telling him, it can't be GMO. It's not GMO. And we found out a little while ago that he had not been telling us the truth. And it was GMO. And all of a sudden, the fertility problem became plain. Because you see, we had pigs that were sows who were throwing litters with 4, 5, 6 pigs instead of 14 pigs like they ought to, and like pigs from the same line and where people were feeding them organic feed were doing. And not only that, but the organic feed only takes about 60% as much of the volume as the GMO. Now, that's not scientific proof of anything. That's just what my experience is. Truth number 5. You cannot borrow your way to prosperity, and government cannot run the economy. You cannot borrow your way to prosperity, and government cannot run the economy. That is the Keynesian model that was foisted on this country in the 1930s. That is the model that still runs this country. That is the model that has failed and has misdirected resources and created the booms and the busts that you have to live with and you have to pay for. The present economic model is founded on fiat money, that is, money created out of thin air, and a central bank working with the federal government to centrally plan and manage the economy. Now, I know they talk about free market. I know they talk about free enterprise and living in a capitalist country, but this is socialism. This is a planned economy. Because if I can print the money, I can run the economy. If I can set the interest rate, I can run the economy. And that's the situation that we have. As long as somebody can create money out of thin air at no cost to themselves and legally force the rest of it to receive it as money, they control the economy. Therefore, they also, the federal government and the Federal Reserve, deserve all the blame for the present economic troubles. They create the money that funds the booms that wind up in busts. Period. Nobody else can do that but the federal government and the Federal Reserve. So in the end, the Federal Reserve must be abolished, and we have to return to some kind of sound money. And of course, historically, that means silver and gold. And all this government intervention in the economy, all this interference has to cease. It has to cease. More than that, we have to roll back, and this is what I hope you as the Tea Party will take home and act on. We have to roll back all these economic regulations. Everything that licenses, controls, regulates, supervises economic activity, especially in farming. And I want to tell you why. Remember this one thing. All regulation aims to stifle competition. All regulation has only one purpose: to stifle competition. Now, they may sell it as some kind of health measure because all of us will die if we drink raw milk, or this thing or that thing, or we've got to control this part of the economy, this industry, because they're all a bunch of cheats. Whatever reason it's sold under doesn't make a bit of difference, because the point is always this: the aim is to stifle competition. And somebody powerful gets a hold of government and gets a law passed that favors himself and puts his competition out of business. That's the aim of government regulation. Truth number 5. No economic renewal is possible without spiritual renewal. And no spiritual renewal is possible without Christianity. Now, I'm not talking about moralism. I'm not talking about William Bennett and his Book of Virtues. All right? I'm not talking about do-goodism, all of which is unsustainable and worthless without the love of God. I'm talking about the church stepping up and assuming its responsibilities to relieve the poor and the old and to care for the sick. I'm talking about Christians determining that they will not live by greed alone, but by that love of neighbor that says, I can't worry about my own prosperity only. I have to be concerned to see that my neighbor prospers as well, as much as I am able. And when I say love for their neighbors, I don't mean some sort of squishy sentiment. I mean the second table of the law, that you have to love your neighbor as yourself. Right now, the government, the federal government, is waging war on Christianity. But the truth is that Christian renewal is the only foundation for all your hopes for freedom and peace and prosperity, and not only for getting there, but for maintaining them. Well, what about the future? You may have sat there and listened to me and think that I'm nothing more than a gloomy pessimist, but you would be absolutely wrong. Rather, I'm here to help you look the truth straight in the eye. You forge your own chains when you take government money. You forge your own chains when you desire their prizes, and you won't take responsibility for your own life and your own living. Gold and silver are a perfect example. You have every legal, constitutional, presidential, statutory right to use them in your daily commerce, and you don't do it. Why not? You don't know about it. And if you did, it would be a lot of trouble. And it's easier to use the paper. It's easier to keep on borrowing. But eventually doing that will destroy you and destroy every last bit of economic freedom that you have. You forge your own chains because you refuse to assert your rights to the police or the TSA or any of these other bureaucrats who rob you of your right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. You forge your own chains when you allow them to do that to other people. You forge your own chains because you don't learn what corporate food, processed food, is doing to your bodies and try to avoid it. There's a national tragedy going on. There's an epidemic of obesity and heart disease and diabetes. And you can go stand in front of Walmart and look. There's a huge tragedy going on. Worse yet, it's not going to end anytime soon. It's time for what the French call Système D, named for a French word, débrouillard, that means a resourceful person who can cope with any situation or development and act independently and successfully. It's what government controllers and tyrants call the black market. And yet it is the place where 80% of the people in the world make their living. 80% of the people in the world make their living in System D. Now, I'm not recommending that you disobey the law. But I am recommending that you find out what the law really is and what your common law rights are to deal with your neighbors face to face and act on them. I'm not downcast. I'm not without hope, because Tennessee is still filled with good people, with honest people, with good-hearted Christian people. But they must act. You cannot sit, you cannot delude yourself with feckless, ineffectual political action and enthusiasm that accomplishes nothing and changes nothing. I want you to take home with you this one thought from a man that all of you will agree was indeed a patriot, Patrick Henry, in his speech made on the 20th of March of 1775 in St. John's Church to the Second Virginia Convention. It was the eve of the American Revolution. And he recognized what the stakes were. But it applies equally to our situation today, to you in Fayette County and all of us in Tennessee. They tell us, sir, that we are weak, unable to cope with so formidable an adversary. But when should we be stronger? Will it be the next week or the next year? Will it be when we are totally disarmed and when a British guard shall be stationed in every house? Shall we gather strength by irresolution and inaction? Shall we acquire the means of effectual resistance by lying supinely on our backs and hugging the delusive phantom of hope until our enemies have bound us hand and foot? Sir, we are not weak if we make proper use of those means which the God of nature hath placed in our power. 3 millions of people armed in the holy cause of liberty, and in such a country as that we possess, are invincible by any force that the enemy can send against us. Besides, sir, we shall not fight our battles alone. There is a just God who presides over the destinies of nations and who will raise up friends to fight our battles for us. The battle, sir, is not to the strong alone. It is to the vigilant, the active, the brave. Besides, sir, we have no choice. If we were base enough to desire it, it is now too late to retreat from the contest. There is no retreat, but in submission and slavery. Our chains are forged. Their clanking may be heard on the plains of Boston. The war is inevitable, and let it come. I repeat, sir, let it come. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. God save Fayette County. God save Tennessee. Thank you for your attention.